Doing it for the story, or could there be something darker happening behind the scenes? While One Chicago's legacy continues to grow, its enormous cast of intertwining characters is constantly changing, and not everyone sticks around for long. Gabriella Dawson could do almost everything on Chicago Fire. The sister of Chicago PD's Antonio Dawson, Gabby started her arc as the paramedic in charge for Ambulance 61, and eventually passed all the necessary tests to become a firefighter before returning to her first love. Gabby finally decided that Chicago wasn't for her, taking her talents to Puerto Rico during a rescue operation. Monica Raymund's exit was so surprising because she'd been with Chicago Fire since the beginning, portraying Gabby for the entirety of its first 6 seasons. That was enough for her, and so, with some reluctance, she moved on. As Raymund told the Chicago Tribune, "I've given 6 years of my life to that show and created a family there, so it was a bit like dismemberment, if you will. I knew that my 6-year contract was coming to an end, and I felt like I was hungry to explore a different role, a different story." Portrayed by Lauren German in the first 2 seasons of Chicago Fire, Leslie Shea was a capable paramedic who held her own in the tough world of Firehouse 51. A fan favorite who was well liked in the universe of the show, it was shocking indeed when Shea was killed off in Chicago Fire's 3rd season premiere. Her death concluded a cliffhanger from the previous season, in which first responders fell for a fire trap set by a serial arsonist. From a creative standpoint, Shea died because somebody had to. At least that's what executive producer Matt Olmstead said in an interview with TV Line. He explained the demise of a central figure would provide an emotional wallop to the audience, saying, "Going into it, we knew if we were going to do it, it had to be someone who was going to give us a big impact, as opposed to going for a lesser-known character, which would equate to a pulled punch." The producer revealed that he and the show's writers considered each major character, ultimately going with Shea because her death would be felt by more people than the others.
And she ended up right where I was standing, where I should have been when the beam came down.
Peter Mills was something of an audience surrogate on Chicago Fire, with fans seeing the exciting and often frightening world of big city firefighting through his eyes. Taking on the same job as his late father, Mills was a rookie when the show began in 2012, moving up to a full-status firefighter and eventually switching over to a paramedic unit. In the 3rd season, he returned to battling blazes and saved a life in his first call-out, only to decide that what he really wanted was to work in his family's restaurant in North Carolina. Actor Charlie Barnett only found out he was going to lose his job from producers just before his exit episode taped. He explained to the Sarasota Herald Tribune, "I hadn't heard anything about it, and then they pulled me into a room, sat me down, and apologized." Reportedly, the people in charge felt that his character had already accomplished a lot, and they couldn't figure out another direction to take him.
Probably think I'm crazy, huh? Walking away from 51 right after I get on squad.
You figure out what you want, you gotta go for it.
Peter Mills' replacement as paramedic in charge, Jessica Chili Chilton, transferred in from the west side of Chicago. She had a hard time getting the other crew members to accept her due to their loyalty to Mills, and faced even more challenges in rapid succession. Upset by the death of her sister in Season 4, Chili gives a patient the wrong medication, nearly killing her. This mistake sends Chili into a spiral of alcoholism that leads Captain Bowden to relieve her of her duties. Naturally, since her character was fired, actor Dora Madison Burge was also dropped from the cast in the middle of the season. It's seemingly not anything personal, merely part of showrunner Matt Olmstead's drive to keep Chicago Fire dramatic and unexpected. As he told The Hollywood Reporter, "You can't just save up the big moments and departures and entrances for characters at Episode 1 and Episode 22. Having left The Vampire Diaries after 6 seasons, Stephen R. McQueen joined Chicago Fire in its 4th season as Truck 81 firefighter and paramedic Jimmy Borelli. The character receives a big emotional arc when his brother perishes in a fire, and Borelli blames Battalion Chief Bowden. The personal and workplace tension subsides when Borelli is severely injured in an explosion, robbing him of an eye and leaving him in need of constant medical supervision. Sadly, that accident ended Borelli's emergency and medical career and McQueen's time on Chicago Fire after just 25 episodes. Sending him away was really the show's way of deciding who won the Borelli-Bowden battle. As getting rid of Eamon Walker, who has portrayed Bowden since the beginning of the series, wasn't really an option, the choice was clear. As executive producer Michael Brandt told TV Line, With Jimmy's character, it just felt like he needed to stand up for what he believed in. But Bowden needed to stand up for what he believed in, and those two things couldn't live together.
Anything else? No.
Jon Seda joined NBC's One Chicago franchise as Chief Investigator Antonio Dawson in 2012. Though he started as a recurring character on Chicago Fire, when Chicago PD premiered, he became a main character for the spinoff. Seda continued to be the link throughout Dick Wolf's universe of Windy City public servants, leaving PD for the short-lived Chicago Justice in 2017. After that show's swift cancellation, Seda and Dawson continued to serve on Chicago PD for another 2 years until he reached the end of the line. Early in the 7th season, Dawson resigns from the force and moves to Puerto Rico while dealing with a pill addiction. A source close to the show told Deadline the writers had done all that they could do with the character creatively and opted to get rid of him. Thanks to her time on the long-running One Tree Hill, Sophia Bush was arguably the most famous cast member of Chicago PD, and her image was used heavily in the show's promotional material. And yet, Bush had no choice but to leave the popular series after 4 years of playing teen criminal-turned-intelligence unit detective Erin Lindsay. While the showrunners had her character accept an offer to work with the FBI in New York, the real reason behind Bush's departure is much darker. While on Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast, she described her time on the show as a, quote, consistent onslaught barrage of abusive behavior, for which production refused to improve working conditions. She had a hard time working through the harsh Chicago winters, and said her unhappiness on the show was even taking a physical toll. Producers refused to let her out of her 7-year contract, leaving Bush to issue an ultimatum. She gave them the choice to let her leave the show, or she would sue the network and publish an op-ed that publicly detailed why she was doing so. Bush ultimately got her wish, and they let her depart.
I always thought you knew what was best for me.
A major city's police force has a lot of sophisticated and expensive resources to fight crime and solve cases, and specialized employees to use them. On Chicago PD, that role was filled by Detective Sheldon Ginn, who was well-versed in surveillance and other police technology. At the end of the series' first season, Ginn meets a tragic end. Revealed to be a mole working for corrupt internal affairs handler Stillwell, Ginn had been spying on his colleagues under the threat of his father being deported back to China. With the whole secret operation unraveling, Stillwell kills Ginn, and his body gets discovered in the Season 1 finale. Ginn at least gets a heroic redemption at the beginning of Season 2, when his colleagues find a thumb drive he left behind full of incriminating evidence against his killer. Like many of his peers, actor Archie Kao lost his job as Ginn on Chicago PD for the sake of plot advancement. As Matt Olmstead explained to TV Guide, it's one of those things where the story was headed in that direction in terms of needing to have a cliffhanger and a big impact of a season finale. Officer Sean Roman, an occasionally hot-headed patrol cop, was always a romantic deep down. The only reason he transferred to Chicago PD's team was because he'd become romantically involved with another officer, a process he'd repeat in his new workplace. Toward the end of Chicago PD's 3rd season, Roman is shot and seriously wounded. While the show seemed to be hinting at a tragic end for his character, he ultimately pulls through. When given the choice of transferring to semi-active duty or quitting the force, he chooses the latter and moves to San Diego. While his character's exit was a surprise, Deadline reports that it's what Chicago PD producers and actor Brian Geraghty had in mind all along. Back when they were trying to cast Roman, producers were extremely keen on hiring Geraghty. He was interested, but wanted a year-to-year contract, rather than a standard 7-year deal, so he could leave the show when he felt it was time to move on, while still giving enough advance warning to give Roman a proper send-off. Most of the action in Chicago Med takes place in the high-octane and higher-stakes excitement of the emergency room at Gaffney Chicago Medical Center. Every day, its doctors and nurses work desperately to save lives, with medical student Sarah Reese in the fray along with them. However, that all changed when she realized her talents would be better suited to pathology, and then, once again, when she pivoted to psychiatry. What ultimately sends Dr. Reese away from Chicago Med and off to Texas is a personal tiff with Dr. Charles, when he learns that Reese's father might be a murderer and hesitates to save his life.
I saw it in your eyes. You were gonna let him die.
By the time actor Rachel DiPillo started playing Dr. Reese on Chicago Med, She had amassed plenty of TV credits, but since leaving the One Chicago universe in 2018, DiPillo hasn't appeared in any movies or TV shows. Evidently, she walked away from her workplace, just like her character. Early in the 7th season of Chicago PD, Lisseth Chavez joined the cast as Vanessa Rojas. A tough and world-weary individual who grew up in foster homes, Rojas works as an undercover police officer who gels with the regular crime-fighting team so well that Sergeant Voight asks her to join the 21st District's intelligence squad on a permanent basis. She accepts and quickly gets to work busting bad guys while also striking up a relationship with a fellow undercover specialist, Kevin Atwater. All success aside, this was a one-and-done situation for both Rojas and Chavez. In September 2020, TV Line reported that the actor and her character would not be around for the 8th season of Chicago PD. Chavez, however, has continued to stay busy since her departure, regularly appearing in shows like DC's Legends of Tomorrow and The Rookie.